Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of UPSC examination. Today we are going to take up Delhi edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 19th of June 2020. The articles which we are going to cover today are displayed on the screen. Let's now begin the discussion. The first news which we are going to take up appears on page number 1, and rightly so. India coasts to win in Security Council polls. Now, yesterday India was elected into United Nations Security Council as an elected, or you can call non-permanent members of United Nations Security Council. Now, there are two aspects to this news. Now, one is mainly important from the perspective of prelims examination, and that is about basic information into how UNSC functions, what are its memberships, how many members are there, what are the criteria for the election of non-permanent or elected members, how are they elected on the basis of regional quota segregated into various continents. So these are the aspects which are very important from the perspective of prelims examination, which has been dealt in our DNS, the link of which shall be provided in the description of the video. You will also find information related to prelims examination in our PDF. But in this discussion, we are going to focus more towards mains examination. And that is about the reform agenda of United Nations Security Council. So we'll first discuss the major issues plaguing the United Nations Security Council and the way it functions. And then we will discuss how and why India claims a position as a permanent member of UNSC and what are the attributes and factors which emboldens India's claim. So to briefly give you an insight, the Security Council is United Nations principal crisis management body. And since it is the principal crisis management body, it is empowered to impose binding obligations on all 193 United Nations member states. Now, there are 5 permanent members and 10 elected members of the Council, which regularly meet to assess threats to internal security, addressing issues that include civil wars, natural disasters, arms control, and terrorism. So, let us start the discussion on what are the problems related to UNSC. Now, the first and foremost problem is the current structure of UNSC that does not reflect the current realities. Now, as you know, that Security Council comprises of 5 permanent members, which are China, France, Russia, United Kingdom, and United States, collectively known as P5. Now, keep in mind that they are permanent members. So, in total, there are 15 members, out of which these 5 members do not seek re-election and they are always there at the deciding table. Now, this privileged status of P5 has its roots in the United Nations founding itself because it was if you know, it was founded in the aftermath of World War II. Now, if you're aware of the modern world history or the contemporary global politics, you would know that United States and Soviet Union were the outright and clear victors of the war. And along with the United Kingdom, they shaped the post-war political order. Now, as their plans for what would become the United Nations took place, US insisted on the inclusion of Republic of China, which is now Taiwan, and at the same time British Prime Minister insisted on the inclusion of France because UK thought that would provide a big enough and a secure buffer against a future German invasion. And hence the P5 came into existence. But now this is 2020 and not 1960. And there has been little to no reform in the membership of United Nations. Except barring 2 instances, for example in 1965, the number of elected members, that is non-permanent members, was raised from 6 to 10. And later on in 1971, this permanent seat which was held by Taiwan was transferred to China. And that is why right now in P5 you have the China. So the membership of the Security Council has changed very little since its inception in 1945. Even though the member states of United Nations has almost quadrupled since then. So, having a look at some of the major lacuna, you can easily note the distortion in regional representation. For example, in UNSC permanent membership, there is no country from Africa and South America. Whereas there are two countries from Europe, which is UK and France, and if you include Russia as well, it becomes three. So you can see that Europe is overrepresented. Apart from that, the regional powers which command significant powers in their regions like India, Germany, Brazil, and Japan do not find a place, and they have to vouch and contest for non-permanent seat in United Nations Security Council. Apart from that, let us have a look at extensive comparison on various parameters between the members of the G4, which are Japan, Germany, Brazil, India, which is a group of countries which mutually support each other's inclusion into United Nations Security Council and current permanent members of UNSC or P5. So let us talk about the percentage of the world population. Now you can easily see that most populous country, that is China, is a permanent member, but the second most populous country, which is India, is not. And similarly, the fifth largest country is not a member, whereas the country on 22nd number in the population list finds its place, and so does the 21st member. So you can see that a significant population of the world goes unrepresented at UNSC. Similarly, if we talk about area, much smaller countries like France and UK have been represented, whereas fifth largest country as far as geographical area is concerned, that is Brazil, is not represented. Then talking about GDP, both on PPP as well as nominal. If you talk about purchasing power parity terms, world's third largest economy combined with fourth and fifth are not represented at UNSC, whereas the 10th, ninth, and 6th have been given a place at UNSC. As far as UN funding is concerned, United States holds the prime position, but not to forget that it is followed by Japan at second and Germany at fourth position. So a country which contributes three times more than that of Russian contribution and a country which contributes double that of Russia to UN finds no place. Then obviously one of the largest contributor to the United Nations peacekeeping forces, as you might know, is India, which is at fourth position, finds no place. Now, one of the most important parameters considered important for inclusion as a permanent member in UNSC is that of defense budget. Because ultimately, the membership of UNSC is all about ability to enforce global sanctions against others. And if you don't have the military might, you won't be able to do that. And the irony is that India is currently the third largest spender as far as defense expenditure is concerned. Its defense expenditure is 50% more than that of France as well as United Kingdom. But still, as you know, India has to become an elected member and does not find place as a permanent member. And similarly, if we talk about numbers as far as the military strength is concerned, India is second largest in the world. So you can see this comparison reflects the kind of anachronistic United Nations Security Council has become. The second most important issue, which all other nations who are not permanent members grudge, is that of a veto power, which gives undue advantage to the permanent members of United Nations Security Council. Not only is this power quite undemocratic, especially given the fact that one of the prime objective of United Nations was to support democracy by promoting human rights, development, peace and security. Now, one of the basic and underlying conditions for any system to be democratic is that all the members should have equal and full membership. And giving of veto powers to few chosen members directly violates the equal membership criteria. Not only that, various reforms of United Nations Security Council as well as United Nations General Assembly have been installed specifically because of these veto powers. Because no resolution or reform of United Nations which increases the powers of other members or leads to the dilution of the powers of these members can be passed from UNSC and hence will never be implemented. Apart from that, existence of veto power has been considered to be the main reason behind UN's failure to prevent violations of human rights. For example, all the resolutions condemning the actions of Israel over Palestinian civilians are vetoed regularly by USA, and hence no significant action can be taken against Israel for its actions. Similarly, China and Russia have jointly vetoed resolution against the ruling regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. So these are the two examples where the United Nations Security Council was not able to pass a resolution condemning open and blatant violations of human rights. But it has also failed to prevent the illegal invasion of USA over Iraq. But it has also failed to stop various illegal invasions. For example, US and NATO forces combined invasion of Iraq. It was not sanctioned by United Nations, but still joint forces led by USA went on and attacked Saddam Hussein's state, Iraq, accusing Iraq of possessing weapons of mass destruction. We all know that 20 years later, there is no trace of any such kind of weapon in Iraq. The US invasion has not only led to instability in Middle East but also gave rise to one of the most ruthless terrorist organization, Islamic State. Also, the proponents of reforms of UNSC continuously highlight the failure of the peacekeeping mandate of UNSC. For example, the United Nations peacekeeping forces have been alleged to have committed frequent human rights violations, especially in Africa. In 2016, an investigation revealed a series of sexual assaults in Central African Republic where at least 25 minors were abused by 41 peacekeeping soldiers. Also, the maintenance of United Nations peacekeeping forces are extremely costly. And one of the most important criticisms of UN peacekeeping missions is that they fail to induce long lasting peace. Although artificially for some time the peace is maintained while the peacekeeping forces are present, but as soon as they withdraw, the region again slides back into the conflict. And various times before, the peacekeeping forces have failed in their actions, especially in Somalia and Bosnia, because ultimately the conflicts arise because of combination of local as well as global geopolitical reasons. The deployment of United Nations peacekeeping forces do not solve those issues, which leads to perpetuation of those conflicts, and hence these peacekeeping forces and missions are not the solution. So if we summarize everything, then the reform proposal of United Nations Security Council spans over five main agenda, and that is number 1, the categories of membership with respect to the numbers of permanent as well as non-permanent members. Then the second most important issue is the veto power, whether it should be continued or it should be abolished. Then the third major issue is that of regional representation, which we saw that how skewed it is, giving more than 50% representation to Europe and giving none to Africa and Latin America. And then the size of enlarged Security Council, and actually point 1 and 4 are quite connected. And then finally, what should be the relationship between United Nations Security Council and United Nations General Assembly? And on the issue of reform, the United Nations member states are divided into several groups. And they have common view over most important questions of reforms, that is membership and the veto powers. And these are G4, UFC, African Union, L69 and Arab groups. Details about these shall be done in prelims pointers. Now, moving on to the most important aspect of the reform agenda is that what is the India's case for the permanent membership and how does India claims that position? Now, India's claims to the membership gets emboldened because of its membership since the time United Nations was formed. So it is one of the first members, continued to be a member and contributes significantly to the processes of United Nations and various organizations. Then permanent membership of United Nations Security Council requires a state to have a strong track record of adherence to rule of law, an advocate and follower of global norms. Of course, no one can question India's records as far as these 2 points are concerned. Although you will laugh at this argument because we frequently see Russia, China, and US violating the rule of law. For example, US withdrawal from Paris climate deal, China's stubborn behavior in South China Sea, all these. But having these traits help because it will be easy for India to get support from various countries which it has got. Then, after China, India is the most significant regional power in Asia and Southeast Asia. It is the third largest economy in the world in terms of PPP, third largest military spender, and the second largest military spender in Asia. And obviously, if you don't include India into permanent membership, then you are depriving around 17 to 18% of the global population of any say in the global platform. Also, given the fact that the original aim of United Nations not only is incongruent with Indian constitution, but India's practice of its own democracy shows that India has developed the capability of accommodating of various factions, views and ideologies. All of these traits place India best suited country for the conflict resolution across the world. Such an experienced country in resolving dispute through democratic process finds its place at UNSC permanent members, then it will ultimately benefit the global community. And then finally, India is an economy developing at a very rapid rate. It has already reached the status of third largest economy. It is one of the world's biggest supplier as far as the services, pharmaceutical and petrochemicals is concerned. It has developed various space and nuclear related capabilities on its own, and hence combining all these arguments together, India indeed has a very strong case for permanent membership of UNSC. This article, Can India Decouple Itself from Chinese Manufacturing, appears on page number 7. Now, the recent border clashes along LAC and growing health and economic catastrophe in India caused due to Wuhan virus has led to upsurge in strong anti-China sentiments across the country. There are growing voices that we need to deal with China at all levels, whether it is military, diplomatic, and economic as well. Now, some of the economists have pointed out that the military and diplomatic routes to deal with China have to be accompanied by simultaneous economic boycott of China. At the same time, the strong anti China sentiments across the world is nudging the MNCs to move their production base from China to other developing countries, including India. Now, most observers consider it to be blessing in disguise to boost Make in India. Now, it is against this backdrop we are going to talk about formal and informal strategies adopted by India to economically boycott China and the challenges which are still associated with such strategies. So, first, starting with the formal and informal strategies which we have adopted. Now, the first and foremost is the Vocal for Local campaign. It is basically about nudging Indians to buy only locally manufactured goods and refrain from buying foreign made goods and especially Chinese goods. Then there is boycott of Chinese goods. And there is a sound economic principle behind it. Because if you see, India had a total merchandise trade deficit of around $184 billion in 2018 and 19, out of which around a third, which is $54 billion, was accounted just from China. Now, the higher trade deficit with India is on account of entry of cheaper Chinese goods into the economy. These Chinese goods range from high-end electronic goods such as high-tech mobile phones to Ganesha idols and even Diwali lights. So one way to inflict harm on Chinese economy is to boycott these Chinese goods and instead promote domestic manufacturing. So both these steps, if successful, will lead to thriving Indian manufacturing sector. Then comes the cancellation of projects which were earlier awarded to Chinese companies. For example, recently the Dedicated Freight Corridor Corporation cancelled the project of signaling which was earlier awarded to a Chinese company. And since then, there has been growing chorus to cancel the projects that have been awarded to Chinese companies. Similarly, the government has asked BSNL and MTNL not to use Chinese equipment for upgradation of its network. Then comes the stringency of FDI norms. Now, you see, what has happened in the wake of COVID 19 is that it has led to a large scale decline in the share prices of the companies across the world. And Chinese state owned companies, what they have done is that they have taken the maximum advantage of such a situation to pick up substantial stakes in the ownership of companies across the world. Similarly, the decrease in the share of prices has exposed the Indian companies to hostile and opportunistic takeover by these Chinese companies. Hence, in order to prevent the hostile takeovers of Indian companies by foreign companies, the government of India has tweaked the FDI policy, making it difficult for China based companies to invest through FDI. And then finally, the imposition of higher tariff on Chinese goods. Recently, Ministry of Commerce and Industry has stated that it may increase the import duties on around 300 Chinese products in order to boost domestic manufacturing. So you can see that our approach towards Chinese economic boycott is multi-pronged, starting from behavioral change, which is basically your nudge economics, to imposition of hard economic measures like stringency of FDI norms, as well as increasing the tariffs on Chinese products, all have been taken up at civilian as well as government level. Now the question arises that are we as a country strongly positioned to boycott China and to make these strategies successful? Because the strategies highlighted above would obviously make it difficult for the Chinese goods and Chinese company to enter into Indian market, that is for sure. But the question which arises here is that would India gain anything from this strategy? Would we be able to inflict substantial harm on Chinese economy? So for that we have segregated the effect of these strategies into two parts. And the first part is that these strategies will have minimal impact on Chinese economy. Now you might ask why? Because you consider India to be third largest economy in terms of PPP globally. And you might think that the boycott of Chinese products is going to dent significantly the Chinese manufacturing sector. But no, because India accounts only around 3.1% of China's exports. Hence, boycott of Chinese products is going to have a minimal impact on overall Chinese manufacturing. Now, let us talk about adverse impact of such measures on Indian economy. Now, first and foremost, you should understand that the boycott of Chinese goods and imposition of higher tariffs on such goods may have an adverse impact on domestic manufacturing and job creation within India. Because boycotting of Chinese goods will impose additional manufacturing costs and will definitely lead to losses of jobs. Because a lot of supply chain is generated through which the Chinese products reach ultimately Indian consumer. For example, if an Oppo mobile travels from Guangzhou to a locality in Bihar or UP, it has created a lot of jobs in rural areas, in towns, and big cities as far as the distribution network is concerned. So, boycotting the Chinese economy will lead to such job losses. Then, at the same time, we should be mindful of the fact that in some of the cases, we do not actually have any alternate suppliers. For example, China accounts for almost three-fourths of the global battery manufacturing capacity, and hence India's ability to adopt electric vehicles is critically dependent on China. And finally, you cannot deny tit for tat action in case of China, because the Chinese government in return may also impose additional tariffs on Indian goods and especially raw material, for which we are critically dependent on China. So finally, the question arises that is there a silver lining in boycott of Chinese goods? And to this question, Confederation of All India Traders have come out with an estimate, according to which almost one third of the Chinese imports constitute low-tech goods that were either made earlier by Indians or are still being made but in smaller quantities. And hence, the most wise decision would be to boycott China in this section, because then we would have the capability to replace the Chinese suppliers, and we can utilize the same supply chains for the supply of domestic products. And this is not very difficult task, because you see, in the wake of COVID-19, India started ramping up the production of personal protection equipment. And within a span of 2 months, India has become world's second largest PPE manufacturer. So you can see that the strategy of self-reliant is not difficult. It just has to be quite smart and strategic. Then a news appears on page number 3, rapid antigen testing starts in city. Now, in this context, it is important to take a look and compare the three tests which are now available in our country with respect to COVID 19. And we shall deal with them, placing special emphasis on merits and demerits, as well as trying to identify the underlying principles in each one of them. So, as you know, the two earlier tests were antibody tests and RT-PCR, or reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction. Now, day before yesterday, the government has approved rapid antigen test. So, antibody tests and RT-PCR tests have been earlier discussed in DNS, and the links to these DNSs have been provided in the description of the video. But we shall go through them shortly over here. So first, let us discuss the tests which we have been using since past many years, and these are antibody test and RT-PCR. Now you need to understand that when a body is exposed to some infection like virus or bacteria, two kinds of things simultaneously exist in the body while infection is there. And one of that is antibodies being secreted by the person as a response to that infection, and the second is infection itself, which can be virus or bacteria, which in case of COVID is of course virus. So the two tests test these two different things respectively. Antibody tests go and look for the antibodies, whereas RT-PCR tests actually looks for the genetic material of RNA. So antibody test is based on serology, which means the blood sample is taken, whereas the RT-PCR tests are based on nasal swabs. So if you take the swab of a digestive system, you won't get COVID, because COVID will simply not interact with your digestive system. It is a virus tailor-made to impact your respiratory system. Then, as we discussed, the antibody test is based on presence and absence of antibody. And this is the reason behind its merit as well as demerit. Since it is a kit-based test and it depends upon reagent and its reaction, it is portable, it is very fast, it gives result in few minutes, and it is extremely inexpensive because there is no machine which is required to read the data. But the problem is, because it is not directly testing the presence or absence of the virus or infection itself, it is just testing you for the antibodies. And since the generation of antibody happens few days after the onset of infection, the test, if done in that window where the infection has happened but the response has yet not been triggered, this test will show negative. But in actuality, if you conduct the RT-PCR test, the traces of the virus will be found and the person will actually be positive. Also, one of the major drawbacks of antibody test is that present state is unknown, because once an infection has taken place, after some time body's immune response leads to the generation of antibody, which remains in the body for a long time. And if you conduct a testing here, the person has already recovered from that infection, but still the antibodies will persist, giving the positive result. So there is no way to know from antibody test whether the person is infected with the virus at present or not. Its positive cannot always be taken as the confirmation of the same virus as well, because a positive result shows you may have antibodies from an infection with the virus that causes COVID-19, or possibly from an infection with a related virus from the same family of viruses, because body always does not produces different antibodies against different infections. It often produces similar antibodies against different infections. So the presence of antibody is not exclusive, and hence this test is not confirmatory. What is confirmatory is RT-PCR test. And hence almost all the antibody results should be actually corroborated by RT-PCR tests. Now here the advantage is that since you are directly testing the genetic material, there is no chance of confusion, because each virus and each strain of virus has a specific RNA structure. And by trying to identify that particular genetic material in the swab samples, you are actually pinpointing the virus. And hence, its biggest merit is that it is accurate and it tells you about the present condition of that person. So, if a person has been infected, the virus is there in his or her body, the test will come positive. As soon as the response system of the person has started to act and the person is healed, there will not be any virus and that will show negative. But the problem is that these tests are extremely expensive because they require extremely high tech machinery, and for that you need extremely trained technicians. And that is why the results of RT-PCR in case of COVID-19 take anywhere from 1 to 2 days to come out. Also, these tests cannot be performed outside the lab, which is not the case with antibody tests as they are portable. Now, let us move on to the rapid antigen test. Now, in the rapid antigen test, also, we test the antigen itself or the virus itself. But unlike RT-PCR, the technology which is utilized in testing of rapid antigen test is chromatographic immunoassay. Now, chromatography is all about separation. So, you have taken a nasal swab and you have taken a lot of undesired material from the nose itself. So, you want to separate out the virus in order to perform immunoassay. So, you can say that rapid antigen test is a hybrid or combination of antibody test and RT-PCR. In terms of target which it is trying to identify, it is similar to RT-PCR because it wants to identify the antigen. But as far as the technique is concerned, it is quite similar to antibody test where it performs various reactions in the kit itself perform the color change which indicates the presence or absence of a particular virus. And hence it is point of care, which means that it can be done, which means it can be performed in open air in the village itself. It is quite quick, it gives results in 5 to 10 minutes. The good news is that if it gives positive, it is confirmatory, but negative test result of rapid antigen test is not confirmatory. And the reason behind that is that if the virus of COVID-19 is mutated or some of the proteins which it produces has changed, then the reaction in the kit, which is pre-designed because the regions have been fixed earlier, will not take place because those regions have been designed keeping in mind the current COVID-19 strains in the market. But even if they mutate a little bit and there are changes in the reaction, the reagents present in the kit won't react with the virus and won't show the color change, indicating the negative, but it will be a false one. And hence, all the negative results of the rapid antigen tests have to be corroborated by RT-PCR, in which no matter which virus you insert, it will give you the genetic sequence and hence identify the exact viral strain. So, this editorial has been written by our former Foreign Secretary, Nirupma Rao. Not only she is a distinguished person as far as the foreign policy of the country is concerned because she has influenced it to a great extent in past decade, but also she is a special person in this context because she has been an ambassador to China and one of the few people who understand China to a great extent. Nirupma Rao ma'am is one of them. So it is important for us to keep in mind few of the important points raised by her, and this is going to be especially relevant from the perspective of mains examination. So, what we have done is that we have gleaned five most important points from this 14 to 1600 word editorial. And those are the only 5 points, trust me, you need to memorize and keep in mind while analyzing India and China and how India can prepare better itself to counter China. So, this editorial is all about some strategic options which are available for India vis a vis China. The first and foremost is the urgency on which the India should emphasize clarification of LAC. India must take the initiative to insist on a timely and early clarification of the LAC. Because you see, the problems which have incurred on LAC have been mainly because of difference of alignment as perceived by each side. And hence, they have to be clearly identified, and these areas must be demilitarized from both the sides through joint agreement pending a settlement of the boundary. According to Nirupama Rao, India must stand resolute and firm in the defense of territory in all four sectors of the border. Then she insists upon scaling down of the contacts between the two militaries. For example, in last few years, India and China began conducting joint exercises and exchange of visits of senior commanders from both countries into each other. And according to her, these should be absolutely stopped. Then she talks about how India can control various sectors of the economy, especially the ones which have a huge bearing on our national security. For example, telecommunication and cybersecurity. So, on areas that impinge on national security, stringent control need to be followed, ranging from exclusion of Chinese company into the bidding process to clampdowns on existing Chinese firms functioning in the country. So you can see that she has recommended extremely tough measures. And then finally, she talks about two measures which will ensure that India is not left alone in its fight against China. Now, according to her, this is also an opportunity for India to align its interests much more strongly and unequivocally with the US as a principal strategic partner and infuse more energy into its relations with Japan, Australia, and ASEAN countries. And then finally, if you recall that India has declined the membership of RCEP, or Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Now, according to her, such isolation from global trade deals or major regional trade deals is not going to serve any purpose for India. And hence, the time has come for India to reconsider its stand on joining RCEP. Because according to her, deep economic and diverse ties in the neighborhood are extremely crucial for national stability and well being as well. Now, these five suggestions, when coming from a former foreign secretary and that to an extremely distinguished one, are very important and should be kept in mind. Umifenovir to undergo clinical trial appears on page number 11. Now, the Central Drug Research Institute, Lucknow, which is a CSIR lab, has received permission for carrying out the phase 3 trials, which is the final stage of trials for the use of this particular drug against COVID 19. Now, so far, this drug has been mainly used for the treatment of influenza. But recently, it has also been tried on COVID 19 patients and seems to have promise against such a virus. If you remember, we have already discussed the action of hydroxychloroquine as well as remdesivir in our DNS. And hence, it is important for us to discuss this new drug as well. Now, if you remember, the remdesivir used to integrate itself in the viral RNA, forestalling their replication. Now, in case of Umifenovir, it has two-pronged approach against a virus. So, on one hand, it leads to direct killing of the virus, but on the other hand, it also inhibits various processes in the viral life cycle. Now, one of the troubles which most of the drugs face is that either they are effective against RNA based viruses or DNA based viruses. But a unique capability of Umifenovir is that it is effective against both kinds of viruses. If you remember, we talked about the groupings as far as the reforms of United Nations and Security Council is concerned. Now, it is important to keep in mind these names. G4 consists of Germany, Japan, India, and Brazil. It mainly seeks permanent seats for themselves but are willing to forego their veto rights for 15 years or possibly even longer. So, in order to get other countries to agree on their agenda, they have initiated the compromise. Then there is this group which is absolutely against any entry of G4 members in the Security Council, and that is United for Consensus. And you might understand that most of these countries in United for Consensus are neighboring countries of these G4. For example, there is Pakistan, there is Italy, then we have African group consists of members of African Union. And obviously it seeks 2 permanent and 5 non-permanent seats for Africa. Then we have L69 which consists of some 40 developing countries from all across the world including Brazil and India. It seeks 6 new permanent seats and 6 new non-permanent seats balanced across UN regions. Then of course we have a separate grouping for Arab groups. It demands a permanent seat for Arab nations themselves. And then we have ACT or Act, which consists of 21 smaller member states such as Ireland, Switzerland, and various others. Now, they concentrate solely on improving the functioning methods. For example, they try to enforce accountability and transparency mechanisms on the Security Council itself. So they are not after the reform of the membership as such, but they are more interested toward the processes which govern UNSC. So this particular news item appears on page number 9. Nepal's new map now part of constitution. Now this matter has been earlier dealt with in DNS dated 14th of June 2020, where we discussed Treaty of Sugoli, which is the reason why we have the current conflict, and the river behind the conflict, and what are the troubles when two nations choose a river as the boundary in between them? And mainly, rivers frequently change their path, which leads to conflict. And the trouble especially happens in case of deciding and decoding the origination point of rivers because there is no one point at which a particular river originates, and there are multiple smaller streams which combine together to ultimately form a river, and depending upon differing perceptions as to where the origination point is, the perception of the boundary will also change. Also, from the perspective of prelims examination, these map locations become important, mainly Limpiadhura on India and China border, Lipulek on India, China and Nepal border, and Kalapani situated on India-Nepal border. Now, a triangular piece of land connecting these three locations have been added on the official map of Nepal. So these three locations become important from the perspective of prelims examination. Then another news appears on economy page. AGR demand from non-telco PSUs withdrawn, government tells SC. Now adjusted gross revenue or AGR was in news a lot in 2019 and beginning of 2020. No need to wonder, this topic has been discussed in our DNS at least 2 to 3 times. For example, in DNS dated 3rd of November 2019, it was covered in detail by Nagendra sir, where he not only discussed the definition of AGR, which is basically revenue earned by telecom companies through both core as well as non-core activities. Now, the trouble is that how one calculates AGR decides the future course of profits of the company because the spectrum usage charge and license fee all depend upon AGR as they are calculated as a percentage of AGR, and hence how AGR is calculated is very important. A recent judgment by Supreme Court had said that while calculating adjusted gross revenue, both core as well as non-core revenues of the telecom companies shall be taken into account, and hence it had led to a substantial increase in the AGR payment as well as a significant amount of dues left on the shoulders of the telecom companies, which are already reeling under a lot of problems, and those problems were also discussed in the same DNS. For example, the issue of lowest call rates, which leaves no space for profit, cutthroat competition, burgeoning debt of 7 lakh crore, the issue of bankruptcy being faced by Tata and ASL, and exorbitantly high license fees. Also, the issues related to other sectors which shadow the profits of the telecom sectors were also discussed. So, from the perspective of prelims examination, it is important to keep in mind the definition of AGR and how it impacts the overall functioning of the telecom companies. But from the perspective of mains examination, it is important to keep in mind these problems. So the question of the day for 18th of June 2020, the answer for that is India-China border. The question of the day for today is, which among the following countries is considered to be India's largest trading partner? USA, China, UAE and Saudi Arabia.